Before we go any further, yes, I did see Supergirl, and yes, I did enjoy it. And as good as Jason Momoa is as Lobo, and as kind of unimportant to the plot as Jason Momoa is as Lobo, I think it's funny that DC Studios felt obliged to add a little eye candy, something for the laddies. Anyway, I am confirmed for 2 panels at Comic-Con, back to back in 2 different buildings. So I should have started sprint training a year ago instead of 3 weeks from now when Comic-Con starts. But we're here to talk about comic books, and you're in the right place. I'm Derek McCaw, and this is Fanboy Planet. Welcome back, Planeteers, to the weekly stack. For those who are watching for the first time, the rules are this simple. Every week I go to House of Secrets in Burbank, California. I pick up the books that I have reserved ahead of time through whatever catalog system it is this month. And then I go through the shelves and see if there's something else that I perhaps should have picked up or wanted to. So I experiment. It's fun. And then I go through the stack. I read some are still I got to read, but anyway, and I justify why on this podcast. And I'd like to shout out to Jim Kruger, who is the person who inspired this when literally I walked out of House of Secrets, ran into Jim, and he said, "Hey, what'd you buy and why?" I don't know if he actually said why. I think it was just, it was the way he stared at me very intently. Anyway, so first up, I'm going to go with Starhenge, Book 2, A Kiss for Atticus, written, drawn, painted, everything by Liam Sharp. And I do want to, just throw this out there because I think that what Liam is doing is, this is, the cutting edge of what comics can do and can be. And what I really liked about Starhenge, even though this says Book 2, A Kiss for Atticus, and by the way, it's issue 1 of Book 2, A Kiss for Atticus, is that you really did not have to read the first volume of Starhenge. Though, I absolutely recommend it. But anyway, way back when Liam was a co-founder of Madefire, which was a digital comic service that was also kind of a motion comics, and you did things. He was playing with the form even then, and this continues further. And I just think this is one of those books that's going to reward reading again and again. And, at the cost of comics at this point, and this one is actually only $3.99. Great, thank you. Or actually, let me put on my magic glasses. No, I was right. This one was $3.99. It's hard to tell because, these books have snuck up in price on me. Anyway, Liam's held the fort at $3.99, and really, this is one of the best values you could have picked up at a comic shop this week. So, Starhenge, it's a sci-fi, fantasy a little bit. The first volume was a little more closely tied into Arthurian legend, and this is definitely going off in its own direction. I'm not even sure who Atticus is and why he needs a kiss, but I am along for the ride. So I interviewed Joey Esposito a few months ago. He was the co-creator of The Pedestrian, which was one of my favorite books of, I guess now let's say a couple years ago. And he had done a graphic novel called Madam, which was like this really dark takes, sort of, this is the high concept, a dark take on Mary Poppins. He is back. Actually, I had 2 books this week, but I only bought one. I assume IDW Dark or IDW Crime is released Killer Influences #1. And this is by Joey Esposito as the writer. And I'm going to, of course, quickly go. Valeria Burzo is the artist, and Inaki Aspiasu is the colorist. I grant you, that's art as well. And letters are Alex Ray. As I said, this is IDW Crime, where, I know that IDW is doing some great work with like Godzilla and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I think My Little Pony. There's a lot of great licensed books, but where I am really impressed is with the crime. I'd say, of course, they've got some really good horror books too, and some of those are licensed from films. But I'm just really impressed with the crime. And killer influences is a great concept. There is a serial killer that only one person really is noticing, is all connected, and that person is a blogger, a podcaster looking to increase their influence. And so I really don't even want to say any further, except you can probably guess some of it from this. But it's a really interesting draw you into the narrative through this first issue, and then clearly, set the tone for what's going to happen in the rest of the series that is maybe not as expected as you'd think. And so I really like this, how they take a killer with one thing, and this podcaster shapes this killer into something else to be more branded along the lines of Zodiac. And as somebody who was, as a child, absolutely terrified of Zodiac, because I grew up in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, I get fascinated when somebody can kind of riff off of that as well. So well done, Joey Esposito, though really I would like more of the pedestrian. And I know that that's not necessarily in Joey's hands, but there you go. Next up is Red Sonja Noir. This is set as issue one, but what's happening is, okay, so it's the Plunder and the Princess. It is by my friend David Avalone. You may notice there was an interview earlier this week, and we were talking about yours cruelly becoming Elvira from Dynamite. This is the writer is David Avalone. The artist is Edson N. The colorist is Adriano Augusto. The letterer is Jeff Eckelberry. And the editor is the Joseph Rybent, who is mentioned a few times in my interview with David earlier this week. So the idea behind Red Sonja Noir is I like that. I know that David is good with the works of Robert E. Howard as well, but he's particularly steeped by heritage and by skill in the ability to do kind of the really pulp, the mystery, the crime things. And so merging that with Red Sonja without changing where Red Sonja is in time is interesting. So seeing a noir lens on a fantasy world or a sword and sorcery world is really fascinating. So I enjoyed the earlier one, which was basically a riff on the Maltese Falcon. And I confess, if David was riffing on a classic of noir, I don't necessarily recognize that plot, but I still thought it was very well done. So Red Sonja Noir, and the great thing is the Plunder and the Princess is, or I'm sorry, it's the Princess and the Plunder. No, it's the Plunder and the Princess. I'm going to leave that in. What I know for sure it's not is the Princess and the Pea. Anyway, so the great thing about these they are one shots essentially. I mean, I think that's the way. I know they've had a narrative for Red Sonja, but there are a lot of one shots, and so enjoy, pick that up. It was a fun book. I knew I was going to dig this from the first issue. I'm going to go with number 2 as well here, of The Dead Man, which is from the team that created Ice Cream Man, which just reminds me that, oh my gosh, I gotta catch up on that. I read, I think, the first 2 collections, and then I just got busy and forgot to go back. So W. Maxwell Prince, Martin Morazzo with Chris O'Halloran, I believe, on letters. Anyway, this is harkening back to, it's not how I discovered Dead Man, but I think a lot of characters I really did discover through Brave and the Bold back in the 70s. And Dead Man definitely crossed over with Batman a lot there, and I think sometimes in World's Finest. But this harkens back in that Dead Man, Boston Brand, in his quest to fight his new archenemy, has to team up with Batman and Plastic Man. And so that really, really goes back to it. And it works. So somehow, even though this plot is about a soul-eating demon, it's fun. And so I really love this. Again, you don't need to know a lot of history of Dead Man. This is reminding me of last year's Metamorpho miniseries, where it feels like it's both using modern language and modern style, but still somehow evokes the 60s when DC was trying to compete with Marvel and got weirdly experimental. That's how you had characters like Metamorpho and Deadman and the Creeper, and you let Steve Ditko go wild, but that's a different story. Anyway, um, so the Deadman is, continues to be fun, and I don't know if these next level books are gonna like take minor characters and make them suddenly fan favorites, but they should. I think that Deadman is a cool character, has always been a cool character, if not always well defined as to why he exists after his initial closed loop of finding his own killer. But there you go. This gives a whole new level, and he's got a supporting cast, which is kind of hard to do in a with a character that no one can see. Although, of course, and I won't spoil how, um, Batman can see him now. And I should also say they acknowledge that like a lot of crazy crap has been going on with Batman in the last 10, 20 years, and it all comes into play. So I had a great time reading that. And then I'm going to go here with Zorro number 2, Howard Chaykin, Jorge Fornes, and Walter Pereira. And this is from IDW as well, technically as the blanket. It's Alien books, and I just like this as a throwback. I noticed that there is a new Zorro series from France, I think, that is showing up on a streaming service that I don't have, but Amazon Prime keeps telling me, "Do you want to spend more money?" And not necessarily for just a Zorro series. There's also one out of I think actually shot in Mexico that I have not watched. I'm still waiting for the Disney one that was supposed to happen, but again, I can always go back and I've got all the original Guy Williams Zorros, which this is somewhat evocative of. And Jorge Fornes is also drawing in a way similar to Alex Toth, who had a pretty good run in the 60s doing Zorro comics. I'm not sure if they were for a newspaper or if it was a comic book that I've just never seen. Um, but I know I've seen the paperbacks, the collections. So this is fun. It's swashbuckling. It's acknowledging that Zorro outside of, well, old California, I think is where, we would technically say he was, uh, globetrotting. It involves pirates. Again, building up an interesting cast, which historically is what like Hollywood has done. Because I was searching earlier and going, oh, there's before there was Lady Rawhide, which Topps Comics created. I think it was Doug Mensch. As a female counterpart to Zorro. There was one in the 40s, Zorro's Black Whip. I mean, you had to have the Zorro in the title for the movie serials that people understood. It was connected to Zorro. So there's nothing new here. He's create Howard Chaykin created a female pirate captain who I'm not even sure I want to say there's a will they won't they energy. It's not really there in the writing. It's more out of my expectation because it's Howard Chaykin. But I think Howard Chaykin is putting aside a lot of the Chaykin-esque things that he tends to do in his own creations and really being true to let's tell a rip snorting adventure with Don Diego de la Vega, at Zorro, fighting for justice, and there's pirates. So really, you know, in a week in which people are very upset about a new figure in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland, it's kind of nice to go, oh yeah, there's something serious about pirates. Yeah. The last book I want to talk about is the end of a 12 issue series within the Absolute Universe. And I was talking with a friend yesterday and saying, like, I'm not sure what is intended as a miniseries and what is not. It's very clear that, the Trinity, if you will, are ongoing and will go as long as sales go. I'm not sure if the really terrific Absolute Green Arrow is meant to be a miniseries. Like once you solve the mystery of who he is there more to tell? Could be, but Absolute Martian Manhunter was intended as 12. I think it could go on, except I kind of like that it doesn't. This is, and not a sense of the quality. It's written by Dennis Camp with art by Javier Rodriguez. And I know I've talked about issues of this before. One, I really like that this creative team kind of played with the form. There were pages throughout the series where really you had to hold the paper up and see what was on the other side to, see the whole artistic layout of what was going on. But I think what's really fascinating, and I'm still kind of processing through what this series meant to me. I'm gonna have to reread it, and I consider that a good thing. That this is a story about fighting evil, and it's very like cosmic in a way, because more so than certainly Absolute Batman, the John Jones here is connected to the Omega energy, which is the reason for the absolute universe being. And he knows there's an anti-life equation. He knows there's all this stuff, but it's ultimately, this series has gone so trippy and cosmic and colorful, and it's really fascinating with the way the Green Martian and the White Martian battle for supremacy in John Jones's head. And again, the great conceit is that they're not Martians. That's just how John Jones, that's the only language, the only words he can put on it. But this grand cosmic story still is very small and personal. And ultimately, it comes down to finding value in an individual's life and family and love. And I just love that that's what it's about. And I hope I'm not spoiling that. It's just a fascinating take. And again, like I say, this is my gut after reading it, and I think I need to read the whole thing again in one or two sittings and just really digest this thing, because it's beautiful. It's a little bit confusing, and I love a book that's going to challenge me without annoying me. I feel like, oh, anything I'm not understanding is a shortcoming on my concentration, which I grant you. There are days it ain't good. So, this is great. And like I said, Dennis Camp has really shot up in my estimation. I mean, not that he was low. It's just has become one of those that, oh, if I see his name on a book, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to check it out. And this same friend I was talking with yesterday, we were saying, I tend to be drawn to writers, and that's okay. I'm hard pressed to think of, there are artists I absolutely, absolutely love, but I tend to be drawn to books by the writer, So, I don't know, I think as Howard Chaykin once said to me, there are the cartoonists. Like, Howard Chaykin is a cartoonist, and I don't mean that dismissively. He could draw his own books, and I know that there's an American Flag omnibus coming soon that I have ordered and I hope shows up. It's going to be pricey, but when that comes out, people, if you have not read American Flag, you really should read American Flag. It's almost as scary as reading a Philip K. Dick novel in how prescient it is. And I know people blow hot and cold on Chaykin too, and that's perfectly within reason. But I think I mentioned last week, there are books I'm going to pick up because Gail Simone wrote it, and maybe that's the thing that draws me to it, is like, oh, well, if she wrote it, it's going to be good. Like The Ring, The Man Who Beat the Man, that came out a few weeks ago from Dark Horse. So anyway, I'm babbling about comics, theory, etc. Please tell me what books you wanted to read. And there were more in my stack. I just, I wanted to get this out because we are, of course, before the Independence Day holiday, and I'm going to go away for a couple of days. And, follow me on Instagram, Fanboy Planet, and Threads at Fanboy Planet, certainly. That's how it works, right? Now there's a Facebook page. So whichever of those you prefer. And, I'll be posting photos from my getaway with my wife, and Waldo the fan dog is not going with us, and because he does not like fireworks. I think I've said enough about that, right? Before I go, there are a couple of shout outs I do want to give. If you are not watching the David Reddish show on YouTube, which is both on its own channel and I think through Occupy Democrats, David, who has been an acquaintance slash friend, I mean, the thing is, we are in a world where there are people whom most of my interactions are virtually these days, and so he's one. But not only was he a great, comic book journalist for a long time. I think he wrote for Comic Book Resources for a while. He's become a really cogent uh, political commentator. And there are days that not only is he exposing me to things that I did not realize had happened, because, there's just so much, which was part of the plan. That was said 10 years ago. Uh, he sometimes makes me laugh about it. Sometimes I get angry, but I appreciate it. It's a voice of snarky reason in an increasingly insane world. So, check out the David Reddish show. I also think mentioned last week Jeff May. He's a comedian and podcaster, has several podcasts, but the one that I listen to is Jeff Has Cool Friends, and I also enjoy his stand up. So I want to shout out to them because they are people that have kind of kept me, going this week. Not like I was bad, but there are other things I hope to be able to say soon, that it will come out of Comic-Con. I still cannot actually say my schedule at Comic-Con, but I will say this much: if you are going, and there are very many cool parties, but I like to go to the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund party. One, you raise money for the CBLDF, but also it's just a cool low-key party, and I, I admit it, at my age, that's what I need. So, thanks for putting up this far. And I hope you've enjoyed the content that I've been able to post, and certainly my conversations. I've got a conversation coming up with Shannon Denton, but I think we both agreed we're going to wait till after Comic-Con to post that, just because there's so much other noise and preparation we all have to do. But I'm still lining up more, and I hope to have more interesting conversations, both leading up to and coming out of Comic-Con. So thank you very much. And I know, as always, there's a lot of people you could be listening to, and you chose to listen to me, and I really appreciate that. So if you could, if you like it, hit subscribe, and watch some of the other videos or read articles on Fanboy Planet. And until then and always, use your powers for good.